Welcome back to episode 2 of season 2 of Beer Time with Books.
Woo! Cool.
The hype already internally is dying down since episode 1. We're happy to be back. This is the first day of March. It definitely feels like it. It's the type of weather, the first warm weather of the season that has everybody you pass by saying, "Have you been enjoying that weather today?"
Everybody loves the weather today. Everyone's talking about it.
Are you enjoying it? We just had a leap day for the first time since 2016.
Very true.
Post in the comments how you guys spent your leap day.
You know, shout out to the underappreciated quarter days in 2017, 18, and 19. You know, everybody gets to 2020 and they're like, hey, leap day. This wouldn't have been possible without those quarter days in 17, 18, 19.
Way to shout out the little guys, Brian.
The little guys. We are back with part 2. Just moving right along with As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner.
Brian had to look at his book to remind him what the title was.
I just am admiring this fantastic edition.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good.
It's red.
Beautiful.
But before we get into that, we're just going to touch on some of the classic corners, including a little shout out for a couple new books we picked up. We went on a walk to get some brunch and stopped by the local bookstore.
A Beer Time with Books field trip.
It was. It's a nice field trip before the final assignment for this section. So first of all, we're going to start with what we're drinking. Who wants to start with what are you drinking?
I'll start. I'm drinking this is Danny. I'm drinking an Odell Brewing Company Wolf Picker Experimental IPA.
Surprise choice.
I surprised myself. I didn't think I liked IPAs, and maybe I do now. So that was my journey.
Really just grown exponentially since this podcast started.
Yeah, I mean,
I
wow.
honestly didn't like IPAs for a while, and I like IPAs now.
I know. I didn't. When I first started drinking beer, I didn't like IPAs, but
I just haven't had one in quite a while. I stick to blondes and wheats and fruit and sours. And so
I hate sours.
I know you hate sours. I like sours.
I know. I kind of feel like sour's the next step past IPA, so you're just trying to find your middle
did
ground.
I skip over
Yeah,
IPAs
you just
in
went
the
straight
spectrum?
for sours. I don't know if that's true
I
or not.
don't
I just
know.
feel like sours are very extreme.
sours
Yeah,
just taste
I
kind of
don't-
like juice to me.
Yeah. I don't know what sours you've had.
Blech.
I don't know. They're good. Yeah, it's good. I'm enjoying it. I think I like IPAs now. Thanks for being here on this journey with me.
Hell yeah. For my beer, this is a new one for me. This is Martin City Brewing Company. So this is like local, if we're talking about local brewing. And it's a Belgian blonde. Just had my first sip of it. Not too bad.
A glowing review.
I always like a good blonde.
Yeah. Local,
Jamie?
but
Sorry.
local and Belgian, but not owned by Belgians.
That's true.
Wow.
It's getting a little complex here in the Kansas City brewing scene.
I'm Jamie. Hi. I'm also drinking Martin City Belgian Blonde. It's pretty good. I'm digging it. I
Yeah.
like a blonde.
We've still somehow been
I
able.
am a blonde.
That's true. We still somehow been able to keep new beers flowing. I don't know if we're gonna like run through what's available to us in our little pocket
Every
of the world.
beer.
I mean, if we keep going, Danny's talking about doing this podcast for the rest of our goddamn lives.
You know they make new beers sometimes.
That's true, but we also have new episodes.
They have seasonal
time.
beers.
Yeah,
That's a seasonal. The
yeah.
experimental
Your
IPA.
experimental's the
The
seasonal
Wolf
beer.
Picker.
Listen, guys.
Enjoy it while you can.
I am experimental. This is everything that I am. and
It's true,
stand for.
truly representative
Truly,
of you.
yeah.
That's why we purchased it.
So yeah, that's a couple of the beers we're drinking, and next I think we'll just kind of tie it in with the books that we picked up from Prospero's on our little journey today to tie that into the recent media we've been consuming. Danny, you want to start again with that?
Yeah. So at Prospero's an hour ago, I picked up a beautiful copy of Flannery O'Connor's Complete Stories. I've never read any Flannery O'Connor. Jamie heard that and immediately scoffed. It was exactly like that. But I'm overdue for some Flannery. So I'm excited to delve in with A Good Man is Hard to Find, per Jamie.
Yes. You have to start with A Good Man is Hard to Find.
And yeah, I don't know. It's just an older copy, but it's like a beautiful, it has a peacock on the front, and I was into it.
Which we learned is relevant to her life.
She
apparently.
grew up on a peacock farm.
She raised peacocks. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
A vibe.
I feel like I read once that you can visit her peacock farm still in the South.
Go.
Because she died really young.
Can that be our second field trip?
Yeah. Our first one is the local
next
bookstore.
Week on Your Time
next
with
week.
Books.
We are here at Flannery O'Connor's.
Just do a
Peacock Farm.
live broadcast from Flannery O'Connor's Peacock Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else? I'm also reading a book called Memoirs. It's called Initiated, Memoir of a Witch. I don't know anything about being a witch.
You're on this witch vibe right now.
I can't imagine. Last week I talked about Updike's. What is that? The Witches of Eastwick. Yeah, this is a nonfiction about a woman who grew up with a mom who was a witch, and as far as I know, the memoir is just her talking about her life, and she's talking about just everything that is involved in like her experience in being a witch. I don't know. I'm into it. I also recently finished. I don't remember if I finished it before the last episode or not. I finished One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Finally.
Yeah, you didn't mention that one.
Maybe
I don't know.
Maybe not.
I was gonna give it 3 stars until like the last 30 pages, and then I really, really liked the last 30 pages.
Okay, cool.
I gave it 4
if
stars.
it went down to 2.
I was gonna give it 3 stars. It ended up being 0. I burned it when I was done. It was trash.
It's our copy. You burned it.
I liked it fine until the end, and I was really liking it toward the end. I was really intrigued. So I finished that recently. And then in terms of podcasts, I have been listening to a new podcast on the HeadGum Network called Review, and it's hilarious.
Should I listen to it? I heard them on If I Were You.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's light. It's like 2 of the comedians in the HeadGum Network get together and do skits based off, like improv based off of Yelp reviews of very like menial, like one was a dry cleaner and one was bottled water that they got off Amazon, and like it's such an interesting, I love reading reviews, especially bad reviews. And so it's funny, they basically like read a few of the good ones, they read a few of the bad ones, and then they improv like based off of like one of the scenes. Like one lady said that she took her wedding dress in to get dry cleaned to this tailor or dry cleaner or something, and they'd like burned a hole through it or something, and so she left this bad review, and they responded, and they were basically just like, sorry you weren't happy with us, bye. And so they role play, and it's really funny. I'm a huge fan. I've liked it so far, and I'm also I've burned through the first and now almost finished with the second season of The Dream. I started the first season last year, and I just didn't really get into it, but I re-listened to it recently, and I just am, I don't know, feeling real indignant and upset about all of the people who are being taken advantage of per like MLMs, and also like, I don't know, I have a lot of people in my life who also I'm sure have been taken advantage of by like essential oil, like MLMs and vitamins and whatever even else. So now, I'm hard into the second season of the wellness industry, and it's it's equally hard to listen to.
Last time. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Nice.
All right. The book that I picked up at our local bookstore, Prospero's, is an unfinished autobiography of Jean Reese titled Smile, Please.
That title caused a stir until it was understood that this was an autobiography.
I saw the title first, and then I saw that it was Jean Reese, and then I saw that it was an autobiography. And I I've only ever read one thing by Jean Rhys. I should look into more, but Wide Sargasso Sea is kind of Danny described it as a fan fiction earlier, but it's based off of Jane Eyre. It's like Bertha's story from Jane Eyre, the woman in the attic, and looks at sort of post-colonial attitudes. I mean, a little bit. I feel like I can't spoil Jane Eyre. It's a million years old.
You're absolutely right. I'm just being an asshole.
But I read Wide Sargasso Sea in college for an English class, and I really loved it as like another take on Jane Eyre because I've always really loved Jane Eyre. And so this autobiography by Jean Rhys looks really interesting. It says it's divided up into like vignettes of her life because she didn't know how to properly depict like a full autobiography of her life.
It's a pretty book too.
It's really pretty. That's why I saw it. It's old and pretty, and but one of the descriptors at the end of like describing what the book is about, it says that in the diary fragment included here, Rhys muses on the question of why she must write. She finds an answer: you must earn death. And that's what really sold me on this. I think it sounds interesting.
The layers to get you to buy this book.
I know.
It was just such a step.
It was a journey.
It
was
like
a journey.
Title first, and whoever came up with that title right now, if they're obviously listening to this podcast.
Was it Jean?
And they were
I
just
feel like it was probably Jean, but
well, if
maybe
it's unfinished,
not. It's unfinished,
you know,
but
who
she could have
knows?
titled it before. Some
Yeah.
people decide that.
Sure.
Good work, Jean.
So that's what I bought. I'm excited to read it. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I like autobiographies and memoirs. So, other media, I don't know. I feel like I haven't done anything in the last 2 weeks. Brian and I are watching The Crown.
Oh my god.
I'm really into The Crown right now. I have so many feelings about Philip and Elizabeth and Margaret.
I need to retry.
Oh, you started it?
I started it a long time ago, like when it first came out on Netflix, and I was coming off of a Downton Abbey high, wanting it to be the same thing, and it's not. But I think I'm ready.
I really like it just because like being able to look stuff up is just, I love doing that, and just to have all these different events, especially some that seem more niche maybe, that you know there's obviously some they cover some of the bigger events like the Suez Canal crisis, and like that's big because it was a war, but then there's also these small things of like Princess Margaret's portrait or
like
something.
Her birthday portrait was like a whole episode, and it
that
was very interesting.
That was one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, partially from like the director and the way that it was done, but I don't know, there's just all these random things that me as a person who thinks the monarchy is really stupid, just being completely honest, it is still very interesting because like it's obviously important to the United Kingdom society as a whole, but
it's
like just learning about the ins and outs
to see the intricacies of like how the monarchy works in a constitutional monarchy in Britain, like how the prime minister and the queen work together. It's really interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot of history, even though it's like kind of just a period drama. A little bit.
Well, we frequently like look up the events after the fact to show each other of like, oh, this was embellished a little bit. So like that's kind of nice afterward to do that. So
yeah, it's interesting. I like it.
Cool. And lastly, for the book that I got at Prospero's, it's another nonfiction. It's The United States of Europe. Essentially, from what I could tell, it's just kind of showing how the European Union really came together to challenge American supremacy in global politics, which I find really fascinating, especially now to see it in hindsight of, the UK just leaving the European Union. So to look at it from the start and see more full picture, because it does seem to be like an end of an era with the UK leaving the EU, and so just to kind of see what it was like in its full force. We don't know the ramifications of Brexit, obviously, but just to kind of see it from that light is going to be pretty fascinating. And just from being an American reading it too, it's to have it kind of tied into something that may be a little bit more familiar, because it looks like it's not just a history of the EU itself, but a history of the EU in competition with the United States of America, which I think is a cool way to kind of look at the history.
Juicy.
Yeah, it looks like it will be juicy, so that'll be cool. And then obviously The Crown, as I had just said, it's been really fun to see the history of all of that. And then also I've been on a movie kick for 2020 to remedy what Jamie has dubbed as my film illiteracy.
Yeah.
Which is accurate. It's totally accurate.
Yeah, I would like to clarify that I said that I thought Brian would
Sure.
define himself as illiterate in film.
No, it's absolutely true. And so the last two that Jamie and I watched were both volumes of the Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2.
I've never seen either of those.
And I will just say the thing about it is like it's so much in a specific genre just because it's like the action and kung fu movie tropes that come through pretty hard in them. And I really like that right now. I feel like when I was younger, I didn't really like any of the genre heavy like books or movies. But now it makes me want to, for the next choice of the podcast, get into something that is like a genre fiction to try to find something, because just it highlighted more from doing the musical intros for each of the books, but we've done so much that's been like banjo because it's been like Southern lit or America in the 1800s or whatever. So we've kind of, and I know that we've done some genre stuff too, because we did Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and we've done other things, but I just feel like we've had a decent focus on that. So I just think for the next one, I'll kind of want to expand my own horizons, because, you know, two of those choices were my own choices on the podcast. So I think it'll be nice to explore that a little bit more, and just watching the Tarantino movies just kind of showed that maybe I'm more open to that moving forward. So that'll be kind of cool.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I liked Kill Bill.
Yeah.
I would like to say it wasn't what I thought it was at all. I don't know what I thought it was, but it wasn't that.
I just thought it'd be gruesome, and I think the first...
I don't know anything about Kill Bill.
Just like a big revenge story, essentially.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, she wants to kill Bill. That's the whole plot. You don't even really get that much background on who they are. Mm-hmm. Like, you do
until the second volume.
Yeah, but even then, you still don't know actually what their job is, really, like, or why.
Yeah.
It's like you get more background on their relationship.
Right.
But on the world, you don't.
Yeah. Which I still like, because it just kept it so focused, and even though it was long, it's like over 4 hours with the two of them combined. He wanted it to be one movie, but it obviously to release it in theaters, especially at that time, they were just like, yeah, pass, we can't do that. So split it into two, and anyway, it was interesting. I definitely coming in hot in 2020, recommending a movie from 2003 and 2004. Like, wow,
we are on it.
Highly recommended. This is hot stuff right now. So anyway, with that, we're going to move into part 2 of As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Speaking of a story that really gets into my one-track mind a little bit, we finally get to the end of the tale here for the Bundren family, and it got a little wild. More wild than I thought at the end.
Yeah,
it was very chaotic.
Yeah,
chaotic.
So let's dive into it. Just to get started here, let's do a summary real quick, and definitely jump in as we or as I go through this.
Did we do a summary last time?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I forgot.
So where we left off last time, and as always, it was about halfway through. This was a flashback to when Jewel was kind of sneaking around at night and was getting money to buy a horse. And we kind of talked about that it being that flashback in the middle of a story that seemed to be pretty linear, that horse would play a big role. Eventually it did. But when we get back from the flashback, the Bundren family is trying to get across the rivers that have now raised to levels that make it quite difficult to cross. They're all trying to figure out what the best way over is, who should go first, trying to get ropes to to help bring the wagon over while they're carrying this decomposing body that even at this point is starting to smell terribly.
Yeah.
And as we're getting across the river, because of how rapid it's going, there are logs that are coming through, and there are a lot of issues that come up, and eventually we almost lose the coffin with Addie in it. Cash, his leg breaks here, right? At the
for
river
the second
here.
time in his life. He breaks the same leg.
So he breaks his leg during this, and this is happening right at the beginning of this section for us, and that is something that carries through till the end of the novel too. So Cash's leg is broken. They're still trying to get over to Jackson to bury Addie as she had wanted, which is what we had figured out from the last part. And we start to get into a lot of other characters, and I'll get into this once the summary's over, but there are a lot of different narrators that weren't a part of the first part. And so we start to get perspective from other people on this family going through. They're kind of making a scene. The body is just smelling so terribly by the time they get through to a lot of these towns where people are just like, can you leave?
Yeah, they get a whole town is literally like concerned for this
like get out of here,
crazy family.
You smell rancid.
Yeah.
Leave.
Yeah, so
please.
So Cash with his leg broken is sitting on top of the coffin.
They're such a mess.
Eventually they're still needing a way through, so they lost a lot of their mules from the river, so Ants the
description of the mules turning
dying.
over
oh god
was repeated like 8 times, and I was just like,
especially because Ants worked really hard. He had to like trade a lot, or like put a lot on the line for those mules.
Yeah, and so with them gone,
including Jewel's horse.
Right. So, well, that's the thing. That was the first set of mules that died, and so for the second set, he then has to sell Jewel's horse. Jewel gets pissed. So Cash's leg's broken. Jewel's pissed. He ends up leaving for a little bit.
Yeah.
In anger, he does come back in the end, which I think is kind of interesting. We'll get into that a little bit more too.
Officially, isn't he the one that officially like sells the horse? Because he leaves on the horse and then comes back without it.
Yeah,
that was my understanding.
He leaves on the horse, and then it's like
through Ance's like wheeling and dealing.
Yeah,
though.
but he's like bitter about it.
Right.
He's like,
mad,
well, fine, I'll go do it.
Well, and the implication is Jewel has left forever. Like maybe he ran away with his horse,
Mm-hmm.
and so you don't know until the next morning that the trade happened because he left his horse there and he comes back.
Yeah.
Right. And so now we're getting into Jewel getting pissed. We are getting Vardaman kind of sensing that things are amiss.
Vardaman's chaotic energy.
In his understanding as a child in this story. And so then we just continue on to another town. And Vardaman is the one that starts to really say that things are amiss with a few different characters, especially with Dewey Dell, who we eventually find out is trying to get an abortion from multiple places.
But she doesn't know what that means.
Yeah, so she keeps trying to find ways to talk
or
about
how
it.
That would even happen.
And it's also very much, illegal for anybody to assist her in doing this. And also eventually we get to a point where Addie's coffin is in a barn that they're staying at, and Darl, who has been from last section one of the people that has been narrating most of the story and has been described as other people as being kind of off, he actually sets fire to the barn that she's in, which causes even more problems, and eventually Darl gets taken away to an insane asylum. So all the children are going through some stuff right now, and then eventually we get to the end that they get to Jackson. Ants gets a couple shovels from a house, and at the end he steals money that Dewey Dell was going to use to get her abortion.
She's already been coerced into sex at this point with someone.
I was confused about
Well, I don't know about that.
How was there money? It had already happened. She had already gone to the pharmacy, and he said $10 wouldn't be enough, but he gives her some medicine, some fake medicine, and then he tells her to come back, and she has she has to trade some kind of sexual favor for like this fake medicine. But then how does she not spend that money? How is Aunt still able to
Well, that's what I'm...
take the money from her?
That's what I feel like, because he said $10 isn't enough, but I'll take... like something else,
So he just didn't take any of the money. I think why wouldn't he just take the money?
I think maybe he just forced her to have sex with him.
I don't know if I missed that. Was there an explicit thing that had been said that she had?
Oh, yeah.
I must
He
have gone by
said,
very quickly on that.
Hair of the dog. We're going to go down to the cellar.
Oh.
He gives her
Okay.
turpentine to
Okay.
swallow,
Okay.
and then she leaves. She takes.
He keeps calling it a procedure. When he says the procedure, he's talking about
Okay.
his dick. Like, that's
he's
what
talking about raping her is what he's
Yeah.
talking about. She has to go back to this pharmacy. This is the second pharmacy she's visited because
Yeah.
the first
She wasn't
guy
able to do it in the
basically was
first one.
like, I'm a Christian man of God, I will not, whatever.
Yeah.
And
this guy's like, oh, I'll take advantage of this.
yeah, so both
Yeah.
bad.
Can't get you pregnant again.
She takes Vardaman with her and makes him sit outside while she is doing whatever she's doing in the pharmacy. And so I guess I was confused at the end because Ants takes the money from her and she calls him a thief. And I didn't know how much she had. She only had $10. I mean, she only had $10 with her, so I didn't understand that she hadn't used it. But I guess she didn't. The guy didn't take the money from her. She just still had the $10.
That was my understanding.
And so just to get to the end of the summary, then Ants takes that money, gets himself new teeth, and
A new wife.
and ends up marrying the person that he borrowed the shovels from.
Which also, I'm confused about who that person is because they call. Like, this is the Bundren family.
Yeah, and
but they also keep calling that house the Bundren house.
Right, yeah,
so
I
is
know.
it, like, his cousin?
Distant cousin or something.
I don't know.
That's what I
Wait,
was
which
wondering.
house?
Where
The one that he
meets
borrows
his new wife.
So the one that had all the music playing when he goes in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they called it Bundren before. I did
Yeah, they
notice
called it
that.
Bundren
And
House.
then
I missed that.
and then he comes out and says that she's Mrs. Bundren at the end of
Yeah.
the novel, presumably having married her, literally like right after burying his wife.
Yeah. We also totally skipped over Cash gets his leg in cement.
They
'cause
cement it as like a cast.
They think that's a cast and then probably loses his leg. Definitely loses his leg.
Well,
Like,
they like smash the cement off.
And it has
But-
infected his skin, which
and like burned him severely
Yeah.
because he was
Yeah.
out in the sun wrapped in cement.
Yeah.
Which is a whole.
So he basically and then Peabody, the doctor who's like treating him, like proceeds to like
trash ants.
trash ants
He's
and
just
like the
what a
whole family.
goddamn
Wow,
idiot.
he like is
Yeah.
so derisive like
Yeah.
at ants like as he's like trying to like
why did they do
fix
this to
Cash's
you?
like
Yeah.
and it's crazy. I mean, one thing that that Faulkner like tries to point out, I think, throughout the whole thing is especially like Cash's like almost like resilience or something. Like
Yeah, he
doesn't make any
"It's
noise.
fine,
He just says
it's
it's
fine."
fine. He faints a few times like while they're trying to set it.
I feel okay. I barely notice it.
It ain't nothing.
And then, like then here he is just like with a bad leg, like lying prone on his like mother's coffin, and he's like,
And it's gonna be a
I'm fine.
and it's gonna be a permanent injury according to Peabody.
Yeah,
Like,
it sounds
Yeah.
like they're gonna have to amputate his
Yeah,
leg.
that was
like
the
almost.
important-
definitely.
or at least it's gonna be something that
he can't.
he'll
use
have to
it.
limp for the rest of
Yeah.
his life. So yeah, I think that's most of it. It's a lot of misfortune. It happened very quickly. So I guess the first thing, knowing all of that, I kind of wanted to get into something that we said we'd revisit last week. Now that we know the whole story, we'd talked about the fact that in looking up stuff about this novel and in just knowing about the general descriptions of Faulkner's work anyway, a lot of it is described as Southern Gothic. So we kind of talked about it, and it was something that, personally I don't have much experience with that style. And so I just thought it'd be something that would be worth getting the definition out there and kind of talking about maybe what in this book brings it into that style now that we know how it ended. So I'll toss it over to Jamie. I think she had looked up a little bit about this and also has had more experience with Southern Gothic novels anyway. So
Yeah, we talked about, like, I feel like I've read a decent amount of that genre of Southern Gothic in, like, college and on my own, but I didn't know exactly how to define it. So one definition from Oxford Research Encyclopedia states that characteristics of Southern Gothic include the presence of irrational, horrific, and transgressive thoughts, desires, and impulses grotesque characters, dark humor, and an overall angst-ridden sense of alienation.
Checks out.
Yeah, I was gonna say that all is definitely in there.
And also, another definition talks about how Southern Gothic is obviously based off of just like Gothic literature and American Gothic, which I think Edgar Allan Poe would be like an American Gothic, pre-Southern Gothic author. And so obviously like the grotesque is in there, but Southern Gothic is a genre of its own, I think, particular because of this. It's examining the values of the American South through like irony and grotesque figures, like showing the how the South in particular in America like presents itself as very proper, but also has these really like fucked up rural communities.
Yeah, and I think that especially is interesting in talking about it in the context of like the grotesque things that happen in this novel, and
even grotesque characters like Ants is.
Well, yeah, so specifically for that, when you're talking about like those definitions of Gothic and then the Southern play into that, one of the things that amplifies, and especially hearing that, this is something that was like already kind of came up with Ants' character anyway, but you know, in talking about it from the Southern mentality, especially at this time, Ants amplified a lot of the misfortunes of this trip personally from his own quote unquote values, especially, you know, part of it was like his promise to Addie to like get her over with like as much urgency as possible, which how much was that like for her rather than for himself? Because then he obviously takes a wife right away. So yeah, so there's that. And then also certain things like, you know, he elongates the suffering of his family by not wanting to owe anybody anything, which is like this kind of ethic of maybe more of the rural Southern man at the time, where he like won't readily accept food or shelter when like he has a lot of family members that obviously need it. They get to the end of their trip, they've lost a lot of weight. There was a specific look into that, your description of the family there. And then even with Cash's leg, where it's just like he didn't want to take the time because then it would be, you know, something that he would maybe owe somebody or have to like pay for it. You know, that all kind of played into him delaying getting Cash help and then being the person to put it in cement. So like that is kind of interesting to hear that definition for Ants in particular. Do you guys think there are any other things that you think would play into that Southern Gothic description for this novel?
I think on top of that with Ants, I think like physically he is just a grotesque character. Like grotesque, we often think of like disformed, and he has like a giant hump. So like thinking about that, and
no
then
teeth.
Yeah, the no teeth, and like he is a grotesque figure. He is not the Southern gentleman that you would imagine. But I also think looking at like what we were just talking about with Cash, and kind of like this almost like toxic, genteel, like very like, oh, it doesn't, I'm fine. Like he's clear, like his leg is gonna need to be amputated. It's infected, it's burned, it is broken, it's gross, and he's just like, ain't no thing.
Yeah,
ain't no
he's
matter.
just like, everything's fine.
It's fine.
And he repeats it. Like he repeats himself. There's a lot of things in this book actually that are like comically repeated.
Yeah.
Like over and over and over by multiple characters. And it's just like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what, but it's like, I don't know. I was interested in that too. How he repeats himself so often, especially. And
that is the thing in hearing that specific description on Southern Gothic that talks about the dark humor. Just anecdotally, I had told you guys before we recorded, but there was a coworker that had come in earlier this week, and I was having dinner with him. He was from out of town, and we were talking about this podcast, and he asked what we were reading currently, and so I said, As I Lay Dying, and one of the first things that he had mentioned is that he had found the book funny to some degree. He obviously knew the context of, like, you know, this is obviously a dark story about the matriarch passing away and their journey to get her buried. But like he mentioned a couple of things where, just the way that Vardaman speaks, just giving so much time to Vardaman to give his childlike thoughts in the midst of this serious thing was really funny because of random descriptions, like him just saying like my mother's a fish, and that's a thing that he like kept bringing back, and like all of these things that like he just didn't have the capacity to understand. And so you're getting hugely important parts of the story presented to you by Vardaman, which I thought was a kind of a humorous thing to like not give it to people that maybe had a better grasp of what was going on. And then also the thing that he had brought up was the last sentence of the entire novel. It could have ended with so many different things after a journey of this, but he specifically pointed that out for the final sentence. And so, we get to the end after this entire journey, and Ants comes out, and he's used the money that he got from Dewey Dell and to get new teeth. And so it goes through, and the last thing that he says after all this, he walks out with his teeth, and he just says, "Meet Mrs. Bundren," which is a whole journey about burying the last Mrs. Bundren. And all of a sudden, the end of the whole story is that, well, here's another one. It doesn't matter. Like,
and he won't look them in the eyes when he says it. Also.
So like that seems to be, he brought that up, and maybe I was influenced by that, but it also seems like a humorous way to end the story of like, this is the story of like what could only be the Mrs. Bundren. Like, how could there be another one? Because this is what it's focused on.
Seems almost like a romantic journey.
Right.
If you just said like he is struggling, traveling across the state in order to fulfill his wife's last wish, like that seems romantic.
Yeah, but then I realized that I passed over her burial like very
easily. It almost was like, I mean,
his tone throughout the entire book is very the same regardless of what is happening. So it's actually very easy. It was easy for me to like miss shit, and I had to go back and read like when like the coffin was flying around in the river.
Oh, the river scene was so confusing.
The river scene I read several times and still was unsure of what was happening, but like it's so frustrating almost because his tone is just so it's similar like regardless of what's happening, and it feels like they might as well, during this horrifying like chaotic river scene, they might as well just be like planting corn. I don't know. It feels very much the same. And so like I thought it was so ironic that like you get to the end of the story and like I had basically just like missed. I even missed in the Spark Notes where the sentence in Spark Notes where they were basically just like they bury Addie and then Darl's taken away, and I was like, and I missed it while I was reading the summary. And so like it's crazy how fucking little it matters. By the end, the whole point of the book is this thing, and then it stops mattering because everything that has happened on the journey has superseded now like the actual point of the journey,
which makes me love it in all honesty, because it's such a bait and switch of like when you are reading it, because I think even, and this was something that was probably more on my side than you guys, but I described it just from like what we had read and how the story was progressing of like, this is just going to be like the journey of burying her, like this is what it is, and we're gonna like maybe there's gonna be horrific stuff along the way, but like we're just gonna hear about how it was. But the fact that like that becomes so unimportant at the end, that like the ending of the novel isn't like, oh, they finally buried her. Took the shovel and made the last pat on the graveside, and
they all hugged.
They all hugged and cried together.
It was something completely different.
I think it's hilarious funny that Faulkner really did like get me in that way, because I don't know if I was fully expecting that, but I was still expecting like a little like nice
a ceremony,
like
whatever.
We're all gonna have a word
Meanwhile,
to say
one
about
of them
Addie.
is fucking married. One of them is already in a mental institution.
Right.
Yeah.
One of them has been forced to have sex with somebody and is still pregnant.
Yeah.
Who knows what's happening with Vardaman? Like,
well, after everything he experienced, he's probably gonna have a rough upbringing.
He's gonna have a rough go of it with the new Mrs. Bundren. It just is so. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I wasn't expecting them all to be like, singing Kumbaya and holding hands at the end, but I still was expecting a little bit of that, like, element, and I feel like I was played, and I like it.
No, I definitely liked it. It was a very pleasant surprise.
I was gonna say, even right when we were like doing the summary of this section, I already rated this on Goodreads and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars this morning, and now I think I need to change it. I loved this book.
Yeah.
Are you about to give it a 5?
I think I'm gonna give it a 5-star. Like, I really,
Jamie.
I don't know. Because I think that the first half was very underwhelming compared to the second.
But it just had to
The
build
second
it up
half
in
got
such a
so
way.
chaotic,
Like literally
so quickly.
right after
Yeah.
we finished, like right when we started the second section was when everything picked up. So like
Shit
it almost
hit the
was
fan,
split perfectly.
in the
so.
river.
But yeah, it is like a beautiful critique
Yeah.
of a lot of
Different
things.
Yeah.
And their family itself is like a microcosm of I don't even know, but you know, like they're all so
They're very different
they're so
personality types.
different.
Like Cash, the way that he works, like Darl being kind of like strange in how people are perceiving of him,
Yeah.
like Jewel, you know, you could get all these different things, but
Wait, we didn't talk about Whitfield. We didn't talk about Addie's affair with Whitfield.
oh,
and oh no, sorry.
It feels so brushed over.
well, so let's get into this real quick because this will tie in a little bit. I want to get to the chapter breakdown of who was speaking during the second half, because I think that that's kind of an important thing, because as I mentioned, new names get brought in, and one of them is Addie.
Yeah.
So let's just go
I
through
loved
this.
Addie's
I
chapter.
Yeah.
loved
So
Addie's
let's
chapter.
go through this real quick. So for the chapter 2, starting after we finished, here's the amount of times that everybody speaks. So we have Toll, he gets 2. Darl gets 8. No surprise on that one, because last time he had 11, just for context. So he still had quite a high number. Vardaman came in hot with 6, and he had 4 last time, and so that brings Vardaman up to the second spot as far as
We
how
learned
many.
a lot through Vardaman.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
he
That's
was
why
very helpful.
It was helpful.
But that's why like it brought in that darker humor, because it was like this person who wasn't mentally able to like fully understand what was going on was the one
He was the
giving
one
us
who
all
knew
the
about
information.
Dewey
It
Dell.
was
He was
insane.
the one who saw Darl set the barn on fire.
Right.
Yeah.
So Vardaman had 6. We had Cash with 3, which was kind of interesting to me. We had Cora with 1, so she got brought back, and then we had Addie with a chapter.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that in the back half we had Addie with a chapter? Whitfield we had 1. Armstead we had 1. Mosley we had 1. So these are a lot of the people on their journey over. Peabody comes back with 1.
Mosley's the pharmacist.
And then we have McGowan with 1. and
McGowan
then,
was the rapist.
and then Dewey Dell with 1. So
yeah.
So
that's Dewey Dell surprises me.
So Dewey Dell total has only 4 chapters, and so like other characters like Toll has 6 total.
Hers were pretty
Cash
long, though.
Cash has 5 total.
I know. I'd want a page breakdown.
Yeah, and
I feel like it's unfair.
I feel
Yeah.
like I appreciate the chapter breakdown, but I also think that like even with like Dewey Dell's were particularly long. I feel like
and Addie's chapter was fairly long,
Yeah.
and it was done like, you know, she had her one chapter there, and so he really gave the space for her to get into her side of things, and that brought in an interesting dynamic to the family, because all we got at the beginning was, oh, Addie's upstairs, she's dying, and here's her family out in the yard, but all of a sudden she's just like not even feeling that passionate about her own family. She doesn't even consider half the kids to be hers.
Hates everybody.
Yeah.
she hates. Did you guys think that that these were musings coming from Addie, like when she was alive, or were you reading them as like beyond the grave? Addie's thoughts from what it would be like if she could think as a corpse.
I don't know.
Because I hadn't thought about it, but I kind of think the latter.
Well, I'll
I
just,
think I read it as a flashback.
I read it as a flashback,
but I don't know.
But also one other thing is during some people's chapters, there was the italicized moments, and it almost seemed like in some of those, and maybe it was just the way it was written, because like obviously a lot of this was more of the stream of consciousness style, so it wasn't just like laid out like this is what we're talking about, but some of those felt like it was Addie in the coffin to me.
Yeah,
because it was like
I could see that.
there was something that I think I can't remember what part it was. I wish I'd
most of the italicized sections seemed like they were about Darl. Like, if it was italicized, it was talking about Darl.
Vardaman has plenty.
I thought that
though,
too, but
of
there
italicized
were
parts.
certain ones where they were in the wagon, and it like made
But
it.
he was talking about.
It made it seem like Addie was like mentioning something about like her coffin getting rocked, and like it seemed like it was from her perspective as a corpse. But
the layers.
But from Addie's chapter, to me it seemed like a flashback. But that was something that popped out to me that maybe that was the case. But
I
feel like
Addie's
the
chapter.
timeline's already so non-linear that I just assumed it was a flashback.
yeah,
Yeah, I think I kind of read it that way, but then I was reading a summary and it was like it's unclear if it's, Addie from Beyond the Grave or if it's a flashback. And I was like, I think that's an interesting thing to consider. Like, Addie is like a present character along with all of the other ones.
Yeah.
Even though she's dead, it almost doesn't matter. That's almost not the point.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I liked the idea that Addie could be like sentient almost and like thinking, while she couldn't like have an effect on everybody, on anybody, any of the characters at the present, she was still like able to have a voice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was just nice to see, like once we realized how screwed up the family was, that then we get Addie's perspective of, everything that she had said in that instance of her just like not really like loving her family that much to some degree. Like she does, it's not completely that way, but
she seems very like, I don't know, clinical. Like she's just unemotional.
Mm-hmm.
Like I took multiple pictures of quotes from her chapter, and I didn't do that for most other chapters, so clearly I really liked it. But her talking about like, he had a word too, love, he called it, but I had been used to words for a long time.
oh damn,
Just
Words, ants.
she's talking about ants, like saying that he loves her, and she's like, that's just a word. He can
Yeah.
call it that if he wants to. But
I think
like,
I was
that's so cold.
yeah.
I think I was confused a little bit about Addie because, like, she talks about having all of her kids as though she's almost like she feels like they're not hers. She feels like they have like impinged on her like aloneness and her like autonomy. I feel like, but also I hate to be whatever, but I kind of was like, what did you expect? Like you got married to this guy. You just said yes because you didn't have any other options. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Like, you got pregnant a bunch of times and it sucks. But like, what?
And then it compounded. Like she already was feeling, with her first two children earlier on. Like she already had these feelings of like, oh, this is starting to like mess with my life, and then there's just like three more later on, and obviously it's like a different circumstance thing because we're even talking about how difficult, it would be for somebody to get an abortion or to like have birth control or anything else, and like that's a whole different conversation because of the time period. But still, like to your point, it's true. It's just like, she did have some commitment to it of just being like,
you married a guy and started having sex with him. Like, I absolutely feel for her. Like, this isn't like, I don't feel unsympathetic. I just kind of feel like her tone was a little bit, she was like, and then I had Darl, and then I had three more. And I was just like, what?
But also her tone about, why am I blanking? What's his name? Jewel.
She loves Jewel.
Her tone about Jewel is so interesting to me because I feel like she doesn't seem that passionate about her affair. It almost seems like an afterthought, but for some reason Jewel is this like the special child, but also Jewel hates her. Like,
but
he doesn't return the love.
But at the
that
same
she
time,
shows.
but Jewel still then agreed later on, because like if you're thinking about all the different like ways people, helped on this journey or did whatever else for this journey, you look at what Ants was doing, and it seemed very like self-serving to get Addie to the grave. But then Jewel, despite Ants's, Ants making this deal with his horse that he didn't want to participate in, he still, as you guys had mentioned, like willingly went out anyway. And that would have to be some feeling toward Addie to even have him make that decision in the first place, which was kind of an interesting like reveal, even though their relationship was maybe more strained because of his attitude previously.
Yeah,
but that also just seems like that Jewel is just an angsty guy in general.
I agree with that because I do think that we see Jewel is one of the more like, I don't know how to, like, he's stubborn in wanting to get Addie to her final place.
Yeah.
More than anybody else is.
He's like very quietly stubborn about it.
Yeah. And so I do think that he loved her, but she in her chapter like says that he doesn't.
Well, did you I don't remember if it was her chapter or Cora's chapter. But Cora is like the neighbor character who is like almost like a humorous like caricature like stereotype of like a blind Christian like housewife basically. And she multiple times like criticizes Addie in her own mind for like Addie being like she thinks she's vain and she thinks she's too proud and she thinks she's better than God or she's better than needing to believe in God or whatever. And
that got some serious religious philosophy for the two of them.
Cora was super critical, and then also there was a point at which Addie literally quotes scripture, basically says that he is her cross to bear and she'll worship him till whatever. And like, she's talking about Jewel. She's not talking about God. She's talking, she says it to Cora, and Cora realizes that she's talking about Jewel. And it's
she says it's like sacrilegious.
Yeah. She basically is like, this is, she was super like rude and critical in her own mind again about Addie in this way. But it was really interesting to me because you're right. Like she shows so much disdain for all of her other children and aunts, and Jewel is for some reason like the object of her like affair, like, or the product of her affair, like is the thing that she like wants the most love from and attention from. And like it almost, I feel like it was kind of the thing that made her feel like the most alive in her life, not even the affair but like what came from the affair, like this illicit like secret
child, because
maybe like her like I don't know. I feel like it was it was something that she thought was like made her life interesting almost. Like Jewel represents like something that makes her life mysterious and interesting.
Was Jewel aware ever?
I don't think so.
There's a chapter.
There's a moment where Vardaman asks him a question and Jewel gets mad.
Well, no, but also
Vardaman continued doing like the my mother, or I don't know.
My mother is a fish. Jewel's mother is a horse. And at one point he asks Jewel, if your mother is a horse, then who is your father? And Jewel gets super pissed. No.
Like, this is Darl. That's not Vardaman. It's Darl. Darl says.
I thought Vardaman asked that.
Darl says, Jewel, whose son are you? And then he says later, your mother was a horse, but who is your father, Jewel? And they keep. So like I couldn't tell if it meant.
I thought that was Vardaman talking.
Vardaman was there.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's so interesting that Vardaman also like latches on to that, because that obviously it comes up so many times, and like that's so interesting that this complex relationship is then like reiterated over and over by Vardaman through this like abstract sentence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it seems like they've been playing around this idea by phrasing it in that way, and that's something that Vardaman, in his understanding, is just like that's something that he latches onto as a child, but then also it like carries this huge implication of the infidelity in the
also
family.
Something that is super interesting is if you read, so this Darl chapter is super short, it's 2 pages. If you read the italics as though they're coming from Addie, which I love and want to like read
I need to relook at it, but it's
really interesting. Yeah. So Darl is like asking Jewel about his his parents and whatever, and so I couldn't tell if like that meant Darl knew. I couldn't tell if that meant Jewel knew. I didn't know if that meant like Vardaman somehow like had some kind of, he was around. Anyway, then at the very end of the chapter, they talk about something else. And then at the very end of the chapter, in italics, it says, Jewel, I say, who is your father, Jewel? God damn you, God damn you. And I was just like, is it Addie? Addie, is that you? I don't know. I think that's really interesting to get to the end and be like, Addie is questioning Jewel.
So I'm not saying that I felt that every italicized moment was the case, but there were some that it felt to me, even if from like the very physical, like in the coffin right now and the road is rough. Something like there was
Yeah.
something like that, and maybe like as you were saying, it might have had to do
Was
with
that in
Darl.
the first half, or are you talking about the second half?
The italicized part that I thought was Addie, I think that was second half. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There was some section where I feel like it was Vardaman maybe that was talking, and every time it was italicized, it was for sure talking about Darl.
Yeah, because there was some that
and it was
I think
happening
that's
a lot,
definitely true. I don't know that
and it
it's
kept
over.
saying he, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't say his name.
Yeah.
But it was definitely about Darl.
So so it's like I don't know. I'd need to relook at it. This isn't that I'd definitely be willing to reread again because it was so short. And like I
Yeah,
feel like there's a
it's
lot
quick.
missing.
Quick read.
A lot that you would gain more insight into the second time through. But we're kind of running short on time here. Just as far as like this episode is almost an hour, and so I'll kind of tie one thing into another, I suppose. But we'll get into final thoughts right now. One of the interesting things is that, again, as I mentioned last week, that Darl overwhelmingly had the most chapters and ended up being the one that went insane. The last chapter of his wasn't even like from his perspective to some degree, or maybe it's from
he says Darl.
Talks about himself in the
third
third person. Yeah.
So,
Which also we didn't really talk about. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. But
yeah.
like, I do not fully 100% understand why, and maybe there's not a reason, but why Darl lit the barn on fire. I
thought he was trying to like incinerate the coffin.
yeah, I thought it
Is
was
that-
something related to the coffin.
That's what like SparkNote says. That's like
Well-
what the
Oh, okay.
well,
like,
even in the middle of it, he was like lifting it up, and like
Yeah.
that was obviously a
the
focus
coffin has
while
been
it was on
moved
fire.
into
Yeah.
the barn. So I think the idea is that, but also I think that he went a little crazy almost, and was
Yeah.
just kind of like wanted to like get it over with.
Because that last
That
sentence
makes sense.
too, or last chapter of his, was getting into all this stuff that like kind of highlighted that he was actually crazy, and it wasn't just like everybody kind of be like, "Oh, Darl, you're nuts." Like he had the thing of the yes,
Yeah.
over and over, and also it was in the third person. So
I loved
I kind of want to like touch into that just because it is important for final thoughts, and then just like final thoughts over the book in general. But like, what do you think about the fact that Darl ended up being crazy, but also had the most chapters in the entire book, or anything that stems from that, and then also just like general final thoughts from there? So
Well, I think we should also clarify that a lot of the reason why Darl ended up being shipped off to a mental institution was because there was a lawsuit that was going to be
Yeah,
threatened.
the family whose
barn it
burned
was.
down.
And
Yeah.
so I feel like it's less like proving that he's crazy and more just kind of like ironic that this is like a trade they had to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They don't
But, okay,
seem
But still,
sorry.
Here's a question within that, because I feel like in the description, and maybe it was Vardaman talking, and maybe that's why I'm confused, but I feel like in the description of describing that moment where like Darl was about to be shipped off because of like they knew that he did it, like they as in the people who own the barn knew that he did it, and even though Vardaman hadn't said anything and he knew and whatever, I feel like there was a moment in that was kind of describing Jules' horse as a part of that transgression, and maybe I'm going insane, but
Darl, is that you?
I swear there was something about like the animals being important.
The animals were important.
I thought Jules' horse was there.
Well,
Was that the person, like, was that the family that they traded with?
I don't know. That was all super confusing to me because I could never tell whose barn they were in,
'Cause
which house they were at.
That was how I
Gillespie
understood
kept
it.
showing up.
That's
even
how
though
I
they-
Yeah, I
understood it. I think was
How
that
was Gillespie there?
somehow Jewel like saved his horse from the burning barn, and it was his horse, but he was mad that this family had it. And maybe that's not a thing that's real, and I made that up in my mind. But I think that's also why I was confused about Darl's like reasoning for burning down the barn. I was like, is he trying to get Jules' horse back? Is this what's happening? I don't know that that's going to help anything.
yeah, but also for like the argument of that, you know, him as part of this transaction for the lawsuit potentially, like I still think that there is some real evidence for his insanity just because of the last chapter. Like, why would they phrase it the way that it was in that last one, and like kind of have such a break in the style where it's first person for each person's chapter, and his was in third, and also that like again the repeated kind of like losing grip with even being able to
I'm
phrase a
not- I made
coherent
case
thought.
for him
Yeah.
being
I'm not
insane.
arguing that he is. I do
No, I
think
know.
he's insane.
I said something
Yeah.
about it, though.
But I think also, realistically, if it hadn't been somebody else's barn, like, they would have just kept Jewel at their house, or not Jewel, Darl at their house forever and just, like, taking care of him because it's the South.
Yeah.
And so I think that it is important that that lawsuit was
Sure.
going to happen.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that there's just going to be a lot of mystery, and that actually is such a cool thing for the book that like even after having read all of it and it being as short as it is, that there's still so much to like unpack there. It ended up being such a dense experience with him, like especially at the end, bringing in all these different factors here. So with all that, just of like, this is something to continue to explore. Let's just get into some final thoughts about like enjoyment of the book in general. Maybe did you like the first half, second half, some of the classic stuff, just final thoughts in general that you want to get off before we sign off. Anybody want to start on that?
Yeah, I liked it a lot more than I was expecting to at the end of the first half.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was going to be a solid 3 stars for me. And it is a high 4 stars for me now, which like sounds, anyway. I really enjoyed the second half. It was very fast and it was very chaotic and so much was happening. And I'm sometimes bothered when I like don't understand things enough to like, so that I have to go back and read them. But I almost like kept finding meaning as I kept going back and like reading and understanding more. And there were like so many layers and it was very dense in that way.
Even during this episode, like having discussed it more,
Yeah.
it's just like, dang, there's just like
There's
way more than
there's
I'd
a
even.
lot to unpack. I do in my final thoughts want to bring up Whitfield because it was a very small thing, but my favorite thing was Whitfield, the fucking minister who is like proclaiming to be Cora is like Whitfield is God and whatever, and then he is proclaiming to be this like very holy man. He has this affair with Addie, and then he realizes that Addie may want to confess her affair on her deathbed, so he like fucking hightails the shit out of it to their house, and he realizes that upon which he realizes Addie is already dead, and he literally says he decides that it's the thought that counts, and it's essentially like, I'm not going to confess because my will to confess is as good as confessing.
God knows.
God knows that he was being such a weaselly little fuck, and it was such a humorous part of the book. Also, was he was so like he felt so sorry and so sad, and then he was like he was so fake. Like he gets to and he's like, he realizes that she's died, and he's like, well, maybe it doesn't matter much after all, but like nobody knows. My will. He says something like the will to confess is just as good as confessing.
Yeah.
And I thought like we didn't really get into this as much, but like Faulkner's portrayal of Christians in this book was super interesting to me. The way that he portrayed Cora, and then also like the minister who like has an affair. He's the only one of the only Christian characters in the book who has an affair. Like
As minor characters too. Like that's what's so cool is that especially when you're highlighting it from these chapters getting split out by name, you then even get a better sense. And I know obviously the page count matters too, but like they didn't even have that much time total from their perspective, and they still were able to communicate, or he was able to communicate so much through them in such a small amount of time.
I don't know. I feel like I even just liked like unpacking all of this like in a very layered way, even just now in the last hour. So I really enjoyed it. I want to read the other famous Faulkners.
Definitely.
I want to end with a quote that I was going to bring up earlier and didn't get a chance to. Because
this is the sign of a good episode. I mean,
it made
so
me
much to say.
It made me laugh so much when I saw it, and also thinking about like what I know of Faulkner. Like for so long, I've read one short story by him, A Rose for Emily, and then also for so long I just had the idea of like Faulkner and Hemingway hated each other. They were like friends, but like frenemies because they had very different styles. At the same time, like Faulkner was very verbose and wordy, and Hemingway was like strictly to the point. But also I feel, and maybe this is my like 21st century brain reading into it. I feel like this book was very, very critical of men and masculinity, and Hemingway, opposed to that, is like very misogynistic.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting, and there was just this line that I thought was really funny of like a toxic masculinity portrayal. It was from Toll's chapter, and he's talking about Cora and their like storage of milk, and he says something that's like, then you have the incentive to have tight, well-made jars because it is your milk, sour or not, because you would rather have milk that will sour than to have milk that won't, because you are a man. And I just thought that was beautiful.
Boom.
I will leave you with that.
You're a man, and your milk will sour, goddammit. And you'll deal with it,
And you'll like it.
bitch. All right? So, I don't know. I already said that I really, really liked this novel. I agree with Danny that I probably, if it had ended with the first half, I would have given it like a 3-star, because I didn't think it was that exciting. I didn't feel like it was very similar to the Southern Gothic books that I had read previously. But the second half, definitely, the chaotic, grotesque nature plays into that a lot, and I really, really enjoyed it. So 5 stars. I'll read more Faulkner. That's it.
Nice. Yeah, final thoughts. Even just this discussion, as I'd already said, just illuminated so much for me, just because I think it was, this is an idea that we brought up last time about people saying how dense of a book this was, and we were just like, I don't know if we even necessarily felt that as much in the first half, which that's the thing, is a lot of times we talk to people about the books that we're reading on the podcast, but we do it in such a particular way, reading it as a first half, as a complete idea to then discuss. And so I think we missed out on a lot of what maybe made it dense overall, from the introduction of a lot of these side characters and getting their perspectives, and also seeing like how the story progresses and makes the Bundren family fall apart. It was very dense, and there's a lot of stuff that was easy to miss because of the writing style, but like it just almost makes me excited to just like go back and read through it again, just not having to focus on like, oh, what's going to happen, is Darl actually crazy, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like you can then focus on the subtleties in between, and like when you get to the side characters, be able to focus on them more, because I think a lot of it for the side characters, it was still something of like, my mind was still on the main story of getting Addie to Jackson. And again, because of this bait and switch, essentially, it just changed my whole understanding of the entire novel, because it was just like, why was I even paying attention to that the whole time? It wasn't the point ever.
Yeah.
And I think that was what made it so much more fulfilling, getting to the end of like, just seeing that you can have a novel without even having that much of like a quote unquote twist ending, still create such a shift in your understanding of like what the novel was about and what it was trying to portray that late in the game was really cool. So I enjoyed it a lot, and I wasn't expecting to like it this much. And like Faulkner kind of gets a mixed rep, I think, and even people on Goodreads, the ratings for this book are all over the place from a lot of the people that I'm friends with, and I think that it was a 5-star for me too, just getting to that point and having it change that dramatically. So that's super cool, and I'm excited to read more. I think in the meantime I probably won't pick one up really soon, but A Rose for Emily would be interesting to
quick read
very rapidly. And also we're going to be reading another book for the second book of the podcast that apparently has second book of the second season of the podcast that has a tie-in to this one, which is going to be cool. That getting to the end, we all had such good things to say. We
mentioned this earlier.
All three of us really enjoyed the novel, and we'll just pass it along, since we like to remind everybody what's coming up next, but just pass it over to you to kind of just mention that briefly.
Yeah, so our next novel is Sing Unburied Sing by Jasmine Ward, and what Brian's mentioning is that I skipped the copy of Sing Unburied Sing that I have has like, it might be like Oprah's book club, like discussion questions at the back, and the first discussion question is compare Jesmyn Ward's novel to As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And I know at the very least, because a coworker of mine told me this, that Sing Unburied Sing has a similar, like, each chapter is from a different character's perspective. Like, it's in that similar structure. So that'll be interesting to look at. I'm excited to read it.
Especially having just read it and having discussions, I think it'll help illuminate that a lot.
Yeah.
That'll be really cool.
It's a much more modern novel. It just came out, like, a few years ago.
Yeah.
So.
And then after that, the next book we'll be reading after Sing Unburied Sing.
Yeah, we're going to do John Updike's Rabbit Run.
Boom.
I don't know anything about John Updike except for he was a raging misogynist and an asshole.
Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah, let's go, baby.
We love to see
Toxic
it.
masculinity, let's go 2020.
Ruins the party again. Pumped.
Cool.
Yeah.
So with that is the end of our first book of season 2. So we are rolling in it. We'll be having some discussions for book number 4 with our mystery guest that we are aware of, but we'll do another again. 4th book is one that we kind of have committee vote on with an extra guest, and then the back half we'll do another 3. So with that, I suppose we'll get a scat to get us out of here.
Jamie, please scat us out.
A zoobity zoo, a doobity da, a zoobity squee bop, a doobity doo.
The soft
so
scat.
soft. There's gonna be so many motifs of scats by the end of this entire.
I want them all as my ringtones.
With that, we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.